the topic, this theme is AI in healthcare. It's timely and it's prominent, especially for a lot of us who work at Mayo Clinic and see that change coming upon us quicker and quicker. So glad to have our speakers here. We will start with Christine Kumar. Christine, could you please introduce your speech and also let us know how much time you need for it?
Thank you. My speech is called The Role of AI in Medical Testing, and I need about 5 minutes. Okay. Should I proceed? Okay.
Yo.
The role of AI in medical testing. I work at a medical board, and we have considered and are continuing to consider the role that AI might play in the work that we do. You've probably heard about physicians being board certified, but what does that mean? It means that they've taken and passed tests to ensure that they have the knowledge and the skills to practice in that specialty and are participating in continuing requirements to ensure that they stay up to date in their field. Traditionally, test questions are written by content experts. In our case, we have teams of volunteer physicians who write, review, and revise questions. While they are volunteers, there are expenses involved: transportation, hotels, and food for volunteers and staff for meetings where the questions are written and reviewed. My role in all of this is as an editor, and I work with a team that recruits and trains physician volunteers and coordinates logistics and processes to produce the test questions and to put the tests together. But what if there was an easier and less expensive way? What if AI could write the questions? Right now, and this could change tomorrow, there are 3 problems with this. First, when we've had a company demonstrate their AI product's ability to write multiple choice questions, we found that AI sometimes does an okay job of writing the questions themselves, but it is spectacularly bad at coming up with the 3 wrong answers to go with the 1 right answer. This is actually the hardest part of question writing. Give it a try and you'll see what I mean. Think of a subject that you know a lot about, maybe your job or a favorite hobby, and then come up with a question about it might appear in a test. You already know the correct answer because you're the expert. Or you need 3 more answers that are wrong, or at least not as right as the 1 correct answer. But here's the hard part. They can't be so wrong that people laugh at them. If the wrong answers are totally ridiculous, even someone who knows little or nothing about the topic will get the question right. And then there's no point in having the question on the test. Wrong answers have to be plausible or something a person who knows a little but not a lot about the topic might actually choose. It is deceptively difficult. As an editor, I wish I had $1 for every time I left a comment on a question that 1 or more of the wrong answers are not plausible. If AI can't help us with the difficult part of writing, it really isn't worth it. At least not at this point. The second problem with using AI to write questions for medical exams is that it pulls content from all over the internet and doesn't really do a great job at separating sources of legitimate information from sources that provide misinformation or even parody. So, information from The Onion, a humorous parody newspaper, or a blog written by someone with no medical training, is given equal weight with the New England Journal of Medicine or patient information on the Mayo Clinic website. Hence, a question about treatment for acute appendicitis might end up with drinking herbal tea or meditation as the correct answer. Of course, a person with acute appendicitis will die without urgent medical treatment, including surgery and or antibiotics. The third problem is that medical boards have to copyright all the questions and exams. Right now, at least, only content that's produced by human beings can be copyrighted. And as far as we know, AI is not human. That also may change any second now. There's actually a case that was considered by the courts where a monkey stole a photographer's camera and took a whole bunch of pictures. The photographer wanted to copyright the pictures because, after all, it was his camera, but since the pictures were taken by the monkey, he can't copyright them. And here's another fun tip I'm sure you'll find useful. Content created by divine or supernatural beings is also in the public domain and can't be copyrighted. You're out of luck if you want to copyright anything written by the ghost in your attic. So, for now, in my little corner of the medical world, AI is not much used, at least not yet. Unless and until copyright law changes and AI learns to write good, wrong answers and tell legitimate sources from non legitimate sources, we need human experts and that long, torturous process to do this work. Thank you. And now back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you so much, Christina. That's such a fun speech. And as somebody who has taken a lot of multiple choice questions, I know that there is nothing better for a test taker than bad, wrong answers.
Yeah, it comes in handy when you're trying to pass the test.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. So next presenter is our guest speaker, Svetlana Makarova. Okay, put a spotlight on her. Yep, here we go. Svetlana is an AVP of AI, uh, Technical Product Management at IKEA's Health, where she builds AI solutions across revenue cycle and clinical workflows. She's a former principal of TPM, Technical Product Manager. Yep. Thank you at Mayo Clinic Center of Digital Health. And she has not one, two TEDx speeches already out there. They were all excellent. I saw them myself and can vouch for them. She's a doctoral candidate in applied AI and ML and an instructor at Cornell and Next MBA. Her talk today is titled Which Problems Are Worth Solving with AI in Healthcare? She will explore what AI actually is beneath the hype, where healthcare systems may be misapplying it, and what creates a lasting advantage that no vendor can replicate. Please help me welcome Svetlana.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about other folks speaking about AI because it is a deeply passionate field of mine. So thank you so much for having me. And I hope you find this talk useful and enjoy the topic. So appreciate you having me. All right. So I want to start with a phrase. And the phrase I'm betting every person in this room has either said this week or heard someone else say. The system doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. Doesn't understand. We just gave it a mind. We gave it intentions and we gave it the capability to actually misunderstand us. And we've been doing that for a piece of software that's been openly, obviously not intelligent in the human sense. This is a human thing. We do it with technology. We've always done it with technology. So let me tell you a story. In 1975, a guy named Gary Dahl took rocks from the ground. He picked them up and put them into little card boxes with air holes and sold them as pets. The whole thing came with a care manual that included a section on how to house train your rock. And people bought them. 1.5 million people bought them. They gave them names. They grieved them when they ran away. Now, the rock had no understanding, no feelings. It wasn't going anywhere. The story around it was so good that people gave it all of those things anyway. That's a human skill. We are extraordinarily good at projecting intelligence and meaning onto things that don't have them. We don't need evidence. We just need a good story, a trusted source, and enough social proof. That's opting out just feels weird. That's it. That's always been good enough. And here's the thing that gets in. This is where it gets interesting for healthcare. Today, the thing we're projecting onto talks back. It uses our words, it responds to our questions, and it produces something that looks like reasoning. So the projection feels like projection, less like projection, and more like recognition. We feel like we're not imagining anything. Something seems to actually be there. And that's the frame I want you to hold for the next 20 some minutes. The question I want you to keep asking yourself is this one. Is the system actually doing what I'm seeing? Or is the story around it good enough that I just gave it the rest? Hold that. We'll come back to it. All right. So before we get into what AI actually is, I want to name something that almost never gets named when we have conversations about AI inside our organizations. There's a whole apparatus producing what you believe about AI. And let me walk you through what that apparatus looks like, because it matters. At the base, you have compute, chips, data centers, energy, a small number of companies who controls who gets to operate at scale. That you have capital, the sovereign wealth funds, the venture firms, the hyperscalers, the people who decide which AI labs even get to exist. Above that, you have the labs themselves. And above that, you have the cloud platforms. And at the very top, you have what I call the narrative layer. The conferences, the industry press, the briefings that show up in your organization. Now, here's the thing. That narrative layer does more than describe what AI is doing. It manufactures what you believe is possible. And it does this through two mechanisms that sound very different from each other, but basically do the same thing. The first one is urgency. Move fast, deploy now. Your competitors are already there. If you're not running AI initiatives today, you're behind in ways you'll never recover from. The second one is fear. AI is coming for your clinical judgment, is going to transform radiology, pathology, documentation. The only question left is when. Urgency and fear produce the same exact outcome. You stop asking hard questions. And when you stop asking hard questions, the decisions get made elsewhere by people who may not share your priorities. So I want to give you the single most useful question I can offer for evaluating any AI claim you encounter. Who benefits if I believe this? That question is information hygiene. And in healthcare, where care decisions eventually follow resource decisions, you're allowed to demand it. Now, let me make it more concrete, because that question gets specific in a way that actually matters for the tools showing up at your fingertips. When you look at any vendor, look past the product. Ask who the vendor's actual customer is. And let me tell you a story. A few years ago, one of the fastest growing electronic health record companies in the country built a free version of their EHR. Free for doctors using it, free for practices adapting it, spectacular growth, over 100,000 monthly active providers. Records stored for over 100 million patients. Product was free for people using it, which meant the revenue had to come from somewhere else. So where did it come from? Pharmaceutical companies, lab vendors, insurers. And eventually, one of those pharmaceutical companies paid the EHR company to embed clinical prompts that nudged physicians to prescribe no opioids. That company eventually paid $149 million in settlement. They had raised exactly $149 million in their entire history. The business model destroyed the company. So here's the lesson. And this generalizes beyond that one company. In healthcare, how you make money is the product. When the people paying for the AI tool are different from the people using it and different from the people it affects, the AI eventually reflects whoever is paying. The vendor doesn't need to be dishonest for this to happen. The business model already made that decision. And look, I just want to be clear here. Again, this is calibration. There's a real difference between saying AI isn't real and saying, I want to understand what the system actually does and who it actually serves before I endorse it. So let's get to the point of, what does AI actually do? Here's an image I want for you to hold for the rest of the session. Formula One racing. The AI model you've been hearing about for the last 3 years, the ones generating the headlines, the ones in the press conferences, those are the Formula One cars. They exist at the edge of what's technically possible. They're extraordinarily expensive to build, extraordinarily expensive to operate. They're designed to demonstrate capability and to market the brand. Now, what actually gets deployed in hospitals and clinical workflows and the tools your organization's actually going to use, that's a different vehicle entirely. That's a Camry. A Camry with some clever software bolted on top of it. Reliable, predictable, modest in capability, but designed for actual roads with actual traffic. Here's the thing that both vehicles have in common. They're running on top of the same underlying AI model, and that underlying model has becoming cheaper and cheaper. The cost of running it has been falling by roughly 90% per year. Now think about that for a second. 90% per year. The model itself is becoming a utility like electricity, like cloud storage. So what's valuable now is what gets built on top of that model. The workflow, the integration with your specific data, the guardrails that keep it from doing harm, the design of the experience when a tired clinician picks it up at hour 8 of the shift. That layer of software, that workflow and integration layer, that's where the real work lives. That's where the real advantage exists. Because the model that's underneath is becoming generic. So when a vendor walks in and tells you they're using the latest, most capable model, you ask them a different question. You ask them what they built on top of it. Because the model is everybody's. The workflow is theirs, or it should be. Now, I want to make this concrete with research that I think every person in this room should know about. A team of researchers studied AI-generated discharge summaries. They wanted to know how complete those summaries were in compared to what a physician would write. And here's what they found. Only about 54% of the content a physician would include showed up in the AI-generated version. And here's the key part. The relevant information was available in the patient structured data. The data was there, but the model just didn't surface it. So what was missing? Patient history, family history, lifestyle factors, histological findings, interoperable findings, details from the inpatient course. Think about what's on that list. That's the actual clinical context. This is the stuff that matters. What is happening? The model is working as designed. The model returns whatever's most salient. When clinical information is buried in unstructured notes, inconsistently labeled across encounters, or just less prominent to the input of the model, makes its own choices about what matters. And those choices are pattern-making choices. They come from frequency and training data. But clinical reasoning sits in a different place entirely. Now, here's what makes the study really useful. A second team tested whether structuring and highlighting the input changed anything. It did. Completeness went from roughly 88% to 96%. Same model, different input. So the lever is on the input side. Hold that because I want to connect this to something else. There's been documented cases in the last few years of healthcare companies whose autonomous systems had entire operational teams behind the scenes manually doing the work that the demo showed AI doing. Let me say that again because it is quite wild. The demo showed AI doing the work. The product was sold as AI doing the work, but customers signed contracts based on AI doing that work. And behind the scenes, humans were actually doing the work. The demo was a preview of a capability the company hadn't actually built. The gap between the preview and the product got filled with people. Customers eventually figured this out. One of those companies valued at $4 billion at its peak ended up getting liquidated in pieces. So here's the most practical question you can take to any AI vendor meeting. And I really mean this. Can you show me a production deployment at a comparable organization running without implementation support that I can call? An actual reference, an actual organization that you can call without a vendor on the line? If the answer is no, you're watching a preview. And sometimes that's fine. Previews are useful. Just know what you're looking at. So the model is generic. The workflow is the work. The reference is the truth. So let me tell you a story from outside healthcare that I think will bring it home. AI is being applied to travel booking right now. Tools that search flights, compare hotels, build itineraries, useful. Fine. Nothing wrong with it. But here's the thing. Companies spent the last decade making travel booking efficient. Aggregators, comparison engines, one-click checkout, saves preferences. The process was already fast. So what can AI add to the margin? Maybe 20 seconds saves per booking? That's a features, and features are fine. But the actual strategic reason to invest in AI capability lives somewhere else entirely. And healthcare has its own version of this, and I think it gets misdiagnosed constantly. So let me give you the most common one I see. The AI pitch you hear most in healthcare systems right now is documentation. Reduce physician documentation burden, automate the notes, summarize the encounter, generate the visit summary. Legitimate pain point. Real-time costs. Nobody's questioning that. But ask yourself this. If a physician documentation takes 45 minutes a day and your prior authorization process takes 3 days, and your care coordination across specialties runs on 12 manual handoffs, and your discharge process still involves a fax machine somewhere, where's the bottleneck? You just made the car go faster on the road full of roadblocks. The note got generated in 3 minutes. The patient still waits 3 days for a prior auth. The 42 minutes you saved went somewhere upstream from the patient. And look, this is a pattern that worries me about healthcare AI right now. Organizations are aiming at the most visible problem instead of the structural problem. Documentation is visible, documentation is measurable, documentation generates compelling demos. Whereas prior auth, care coordination, discharge handoffs, the structural inefficiencies that come from actual hours of actual care delivery, those are harder to demo and harder to sell. So the AI gets pointed at the visible problem. So before endorsing any AI initiative, here's a framework I want you to use. 4 questions. Question 1, what actually limits us from doing more or doing it better? Look past what's annoying and time consuming. Look past what generates the most complaints. Find the actual ceiling on output or quality. If you removed it together, something would meaningfully change. That's your real bottleneck. Question 2, is this a problem the initiative is aimed at? Map the proposed solution to the actual constraint. If those don't line up, the initiative is targeting something more legible, easier to demo, easier to sell. The impact lives somewhere else. Question 3, who defined the problem? The people closest to the work know where the real drag is. The people writing the business case often work upstream from it. If the problem definition came top down, they pressure test it against frontline experience before the budget gets committed. Question 4, can the vendor show you a specific attributable, measurable outcome from a real deployment? An auditable number. Something like, we reduced denials in cardiology by 23%. Here's the methodology. Here's the customer you can call. If the answer is, we're still measuring, or it's hard to isolate the impact, that's the information. The real bottleneck solutions produce numbers that are easy to find because everyone involved wants to find them. So let me bring up a design reality that almost never makes it into any of these AI conversations about healthcare. Healthcare doesn't have time to chat with AI. I'll say that again. Healthcare doesn't have time to chat with AI. Most of the AI tools being built right now are reactive. Query the system, type a question, wait for a response, read the response, decide what to do with it. That interaction model assumes the user has a moment of calm to formulate the right question and a moment of patience to wait for the answer. That's the design pattern someone else had spent 8 hours who has never spent 8 hours on their feet. Clinical work is moving. It's interaction driven. It's context switching under load. So what healthcare actually needs from AI is closer to a smoke alarm than a chatbot. The system that flags a pattern before a clinician has to notice it. The information that surfaces at the moment of a decision rather than in response to a search. the workflow that pushes the relevant piece of patient history forward without anyone having to ask for it. The organizations getting real adoption right now are the ones building AI that behaves like a well-designed instrument. It shows up at the right moment, the design fits the actual environment, and the user get what they need without having to query for it. If you remember nothing else from this section, remember this. Healthcare is a receive economy. AI built on the query model is going to keep underperforming. And the reasons have very little to do with the model itself. So I want to bring this to what I think is the most strategically important question for any healthcare system thinking seriously about AI. Epic is going to ship AI. In fact, Epic is already shipping them. Every EHR vendor will, and the cloud platforms will, the startups will. The capability is going to be in the room regardless of whether your organization decides what your organization decides to do. So the strategic question is no longer whether to use AI. The strategic question is, what will Epic never be able to build for you? Epic has data from hundreds of healthcare systems, aggregated, normalized, generalized, useful in ways generic things are useful. But your institution has something Epic will never have access to: your specific clinical reasoning, your unique patient population, the people who travel to Mayo Clinic from across the country, somewhere across the world, for a diagnosis no one else has been able to make. The multidisciplinary conversations where complex cases get solved in ways that happen nowhere else. That institutional knowledge accumulated across decades of practice in your specific specialties. That's the secret sauce. So the advantage log lives where only your institution can put it. The model is generic, the cloud platform is generic, the documentation will be generic. Your specific population, your specific clinical reasoning, your institutional culture, those are yours alone. So the AI initiative worth building is the one that takes what's irreplaceable about your institution and makes it work harder. The one that would still be valuable if Epic shipped a generic version of it tomorrow. Because the generic version would be missing the thing that mattered. The harder question, that's a harder question than, should we adopt AI? That's also the right question. So I want to give you a takeaway, and then I want to give you something to carry out of this room. The advantage was never in the model. The advantage lives is in what you build on top of it, what you feed into it, what problem you aim it at, and whether you're willing to ask harder questions than the marketing wants you to ask. So think about what that means for the people in this room. You understand what the clinical information matters and when. You know which details get omitted in the discharge summary and why that matters 3 weeks later when the patient comes back to the emergency department. You know where the real bottlenecks live in the care delivery. The ones on the dashboards and the ones only you know about during your shift. You know what makes this institution different and than the one 3 states away with the same EHR vendor and the same AI contracts. In a world where AI is becoming generic, the knowledge of what to build, of what to surface, what problem is actually worth solving. That knowledge becomes the scarce thing, the valuable thing, the thing that nobody competes with you on. You are the variable that determines whether AI is useful in your environment. The organization that figures this out, stop asking about, are we using enough AI? And start asking, are we building the right things? They invest in people and in the processes that can answer 4 questions. They build the proactive systems that show up at the right moment. They protect and systematize the institutional knowledge that no vendor can replicate. That's the technology strategy and the people strategy woven together. And technology is the smaller part. So here's what I want you to carry out of this room. Hold the question. Who benefits if I believe this? Watch for the preview. They can't give you a reference. You're watching a preview. Aim at the real problem. A question before you endorse anything. And remember the smoke alarm. Healthcare receives. Build for receiving. your work is one of the most consequential domains AI will ever touch. So that's a reason to understand it clearly, to ask harder questions, to build the things only you can build. You are for good care. So be for the technology that serves it. Thank you.
Svetlana, thank you so much for the timely and insightful speech. I will need to defer to our president to help me with the timing here. We a bit over our schedule. Should we proceed with the table topics or with the follow-up speeches?
We
Questions?
probably should
Mhm.
ask for guests to see if they have questions. So if there are any questions for our guest, Svetlana, this is the time to do it. Anybody?
Anybody?
I have a question just off the bat. I'd love to know what's behind you, those pictures behind you. I have been looking at them during your speech. I just need to know what is this eyeball? What am I looking at?
I think that's an abstract art of my
Oh, okay.
I'm actually in
That's
now
perfectly fine.
Alabama right now at a hotel room taking this call. So yeah, that's not our artwork. Hotels.
I thought
I
it was
love
a
it.
medical diagram too. I
Me
was trying to
too.
figure it out. I was like, is that a heart? And
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's like
It's perfect. It looks abstract. Does anyone work in AI, by the way? I assume everyone's jobs maybe interact or touch, or someone has been using Copilot, maybe in some of your work, at least for documents. So sound somewhat familiar
Looks like a
with.
lot, yeah.
Cool.
Also, Mayo has done a lot to advance it forward. So with the Mayo Clinic platform where I work, part of what we do is not just digitizing and de-identifying patient data, but also helping our clinicians develop AI solutions that identify patients early with any diagnosis that they may advance to in the future, or provide suggestions about what's the next best step for those patients. And that's where your talk was especially impactful. I do have a quick question. From your perspective,
Yes.
you give that very, I think, example that all of us have lived through in terms of the patient charting of 45 minutes, but then the process of a patient engagement and discharge involving a fax machine somewhere along the way. So from this kind of framework, what do you see? What would you recommend? What question would you recommend somebody like me addressing first prior to modifying the physician notes process?
I would say I think it's trying to map out the whole entire process. So think from first principles. If current processes did not exist, or let's say let's do the exercise with the current processes and understand how the patient and the duration of steps that a patient kind of has to flow. And you have the parallel paths of what actions the provider and then maybe the supporting teams have to do. And then how much do those things take? When you put things into perspective, you can start to compare things and say, okay, I understand that even visually, I could see that this is actually taking up most time. There's a whole bottleneck that is clearly shown here. You're starting to isolate a problem or basically that bottleneck into in this whole entire process. And I'm thinking from first principles, if that impediment or whatever that step had to be reimagined, let's say it's AI tools, sometimes it can be solved without AI. And they've encountered working with clients in healthcare that sometimes their problems are more operational than it's flow related than anything AI can help them solve. So thinking from first principles, how would you map out a process or maybe those steps? I would say go one before and then one after. How would you actually condense the timeline if AI or if you had a better tool or maybe a better process? So looking at, first of all, pointing in and almost creating like a heat map across the user journey. You can anchor it to a provider's journey. You can anchor it to the supporting team's journey and try to isolate those kind of time sucks in the current schedule. I've mentioned discharge and pre-auths because historically, and I think this is industry wide, those are the things that do take up a huge amount and a big pain point. Unfortunately, is not currently being solved effectively in the spaces. And unfortunately, it does take sometimes up to a week for a patient to hear back about their pre authorization, just because that whole process is quite manual to this day. There's not a tool that can automate sending a pre-authorization to the insurance company and then receiving that response back. It is highly manual currently. Same thing with discharge summaries, especially for inpatient workflows. I heard one provider just last week talk about this, that if you have an inpatient, typically you don't do discharge until the patient gets discharged home. What happens when they've been in the hospital for 2 weeks, maybe a month? Now you have all of this backup documentation that you haven't been aggregating daily, and you're not solely responsible for doing the discharges because your shift or that patient changes hands between different workers. So who's responsible for doing that discharge? So what is the best practice? So what's currently happening is that at discharge is when all of that documentation gets summarized by one person that needs to aggregate all of these notes across all of these different providers and have something drafted for a patient to either take home or to transition care to someone else. And again, that's not a very attractive problem to solve in healthcare. And unfortunately, it's not getting the attention it needs, but it's clearly a huge time suck. And it's, if you ask from a satisfaction perspective, probably the nurses and the physicians, that's the most, I would say, annoying to the provider's task to do. They will still do it, but it takes a huge amount of time for them to aggregate all of that documentation. When the patient is ready for discharge, which again has downstream outcomes, then the patient is delayed for their transfer. The patient stays an extra day, so the hospital cannot be reimbursed for that extra day, and it's all due to documentation that could have been prevented with more efficient tools.
Thank you, Svetlana. Anyone? Any more questions?
I have a question. I know we don't have a lot of time. So I work in the laboratory. I'm a quality specialist. I liked many of your comments, including focusing on what quality can we provide. One of the gaps that we see boots on the ground is we'd love AI to take over some of the double checking tasks that a human looking at patient label, making sure the labels are the same person, top and bottom, is a hard task for someone to do 8 hours a day. And making sure it's right is critical to us providing these results. But it doesn't seem that people are interested in building AI for these less flashy. They want to make these creative solutions when really I just need someone to build a robot that can carry this thing to the right place so that a human doesn't have to do that. Have you heard anything? Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah.
It feels like we're getting so high level. We're not doing live things anymore.
Oh, of course. And I think the true value lives in these unattractive problems that don't, again, are not as interesting from a demo perspective, from an industry kind of lens perspective. And again, talk about the narratives. That's that top layer of the whole kind of assembly, the layers that I talked about. How do you craft narrative that you're getting value from AI? Unfortunately, those are unattractive solutions, the boring solutions, where true value, I would argue, lives, don't make it to those demos, and they're not the top discussed use cases for AI. It's the scribing solution, it's the coding solutions, it's eligibility and benefits. Those are really attractive because they involve different like payers, different players, I would say. But what you're talking about, and I worked on a very similar kind of use case that was on maybe not as attractive from a demo perspective, but there's this terminology called review and edit as a workflow pattern where, human, let's say, does most of the work and then AI is used to do the review and edit. From an adoption standpoint, I can tell you from experience that when you are very short on time and you have a lot of kind of backfill tasks, AI does not get used, unfortunately. And so we see declining patterns in AI usage when AI is used as an afterthought. Where you do get a lot more adoption, and you could always call it forcing into a workflow, when you have AI take the first stab at predicting or maybe performing that specific task, and then human is the auditor or the human in the loop is basically behind that. What enables that for you to do is you can also start to see which and start to mark use cases that are easy to automate. So maybe these are like your common in labs. I don't know if it's like a UA, like urinary analysis, that for a very simple condition, or maybe the provider didn't really flag it as anything interesting. It's just routine type of a test. Maybe those things get automated. But the more complex, that's just the nature of Mayo Clinic and the population it serves, the more complex, the multidimensional kind of considerations that you have to do, those remain to be completely either human in the loop or whatever, but that enables you to look into kind of the whole system as a whole to see and start to mark opportunities for automation to give you more time back, because it's not the matter of working harder and then pushing yourself more, because healthcare is not going to stop and you're going to see more patients. You're going to, I don't know, there's going to be influxes and kind of seasonal influxes. So you're going to see those patterns. So how can you work smarter and not harder? And then I think we've seen again more benefit of including AI more upstream. And then you figure out how much you want to automate from that workflow perspective. And that we see higher adoption in those types of workflows. Something to think about.
Thank you so much, Svetlana. We are completely off script right now. We've blown through all of our timelines. So thank you again. It's a very insightful conversation. And yes, we are in the midst of all of those questions right now. If you have anything to say to us before we switch over back to the regular agenda, which is going to be the Tamara's report and Grammarian's report for Kristina's speech, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would maybe, as Nadia had already mentioned, like to promote my TEDx talks, especially the one you can probably find me on my LinkedIn page. And although I do work on AI adoption and helping organizations adopt and kind of think about AI, I practice what I call human first AI. And I do believe that the fear, kind of these fear mongering kind of narratives are instilling kind of uncertainty in the industry. So my talk is really about building resiliency in the age of AI. So what qualities will matter as more and more work gets automated. So if you have 14 minutes to watch a TEDx talk, I'd love to promote it. You can find it on my LinkedIn page, or you can search my name with TEDx on YouTube, and you'll probably find my talk. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me and ask all the great questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to the regular agenda.
Sure.
Thomas, would you mind giving us a quick timers report for Kristina's speech?
Okay, yeah, sure. This is going to be quick. Kristina, you took 5 minutes and 12 seconds. And I did not time Svetlana. But yeah, it was definitely more than 5 minutes long. That's my timer's report.
Thank you, Thomas. Jean, how about your Grammarian's report?
No one used tortuous. And you did, Kristina. I'm sorry.
I called my process a long and torturous process. I added
Yes, you did. I missed that. I apologize. Overall, the question and answer period was the only time in which we had more ahs and ums in Svetlana's talk. Kristina, you did quite well with no connectors. But that, as you can tell, when you don't have a prepared presentation is when we have the hardest time in using pauses instead of connectors. Overall, it was a great meeting grammatically. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Jean. We will share, Donna, back to your comment there. We will share the recording after the meeting as long as you have signed up and we have your email address. So please, if you have not done this, please send this over to the organizers and we'll do that.
And I will give Kristina an evaluation of her presentation at the officers' meeting next week so that she will not miss out on that.
Thank you. Now I will, Thomas, I think right now it's your turn to conclude the meeting.
All right. Thank you, Nadia. So before we wrap up today, I just want to thank everyone for being here, especially our guests and Svetlana. Svetlana, thank you for sharing your time and experience and all your insights with us today, because AI in healthcare is a very important and evolving topic. And one thing I personally appreciate about Toastmasters is that it's much more than about public speaking. It's about learning to communicate clearly, build confidence, think on your feet, and connect with other people professionally and personally. And the great thing is you don't need to be experienced speaker to participate. Most of us joined because we wanted to improve something, right? Toastmasters gives us a supportive environment to practice those skills consistently. And what makes this club especially meaningful is that we have a lot of backgrounds here at Mayo. There's a lot of people from operations, technology, research, leadership. So Yeah. So if you're visiting as a guest today, I'd really like to encourage you to come back and join us again sometime. There's no pressure to give speeches or anything like that. You can, I think our next meeting is May 29th. So if you want to come, it's going to be the same Zoom meeting link, and you can always, we'll follow up with you guys as well. And again, thank you everyone who joined us today, and especially to Svetlana, who was a great speaker today as well. So hope to see you again at a future meeting.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.